I'm Di Gillett, and this is the Power of Women podcast. Let me tell you a little bit about who we are. We're a platform that showcases and celebrates the strength, resilience, and achievements of women from all walks of life. In each episode, I pose questions to my guests to peel away the layers to reveal the knowledge and experiences that shape their narrative. So if you're feeling unseen, unheard, or simply looking for inspiration, then the Power of Women podcast is a really great place to join the conversation. But before I start, are you following the podcast? The more followers and the more subscribers, the more great content we can bring to you. Now for today's podcast. Today's guest leans into a sector really close to my heart, the fashion industry. Despite our respective industry backgrounds, our worlds haven't actually intersected until now. However, this individual was recommended as someone I absolutely had to engage. And the referrer did warn me, this individual isn't shy. So, who is she? Well, today's guest has had a diverse career over the past 3 decades, spanning fashion, publishing, and advertising industries. She has been described as a power agent by the publisher of Rag Trade magazine, Azir Ben Majoub. Her contribution to the fashion industry is actually multifaceted as a fashion writer, commentator, consultant, mentor, and until recently was on the advisory board for the fashion design studio at Sydney TAFE, whose past graduates include Akira Sagawa, Alex Perry, and Nikki Zimmerman. Fashion, however, is only part of her story. This powerhouse is a passionate supporter of not-for-profits. She's an ambassador of Shake It Up Australia Foundation and Adopt Change, two causes that have impacted her personally, and I guess we're going to touch on that in the podcast today. Joining me today on the Power of Women podcast is the truly inspirational Phoebes Garland. Hey, Phoebes.
Hi, Di.
How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for your lovely intro. Wow.
Oh, you're most welcome. You're most welcome. And you're joining me from Sydney today.
I am. It's actually a very warm day, which is something that at this time of year we don't love in the fashion industry when knitwear's on the
Yeah,
floor.
that doesn't work when you've got racks and racks
No.
full of coats and warm apparel.
Yes.
They say
it's
you're not allowed to complain though, because there's always something to complain about in the rag trade, hey?
I think you absolutely nailed it. It really is. It's not for the faint-hearted, this industry.
Yeah, having spent so much time in it, I have to confess, even though I'm not in the industry anymore, my wardrobe is still merchandise left to right, light to dark, top to bottom, which as a rag trade person, that will make sense to you.
Oh, I love that. And are you really particular about hangers?
Oh, absolutely. They're all the same. They're either padded satin or a sort of customized black hanger, but they all match.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. I'm guessing yours do too.
Yes, actually, there's that scene out of that movie with Joan Crawford where she talks about the wire hangers, and I think of everybody in the
Oh,
industry
I
that
know.
hate wire hangers.
Yeah, I can remember what was the movie with Witherspoon all those years ago, and the wardrobe came out and it spun around well
Oh,
before Legally Blonde. I'll think of it as it goes on, but it was an absolute favorite. And then of course in Sex and the City, Carrie's wardrobe scenes were kind of something that I kind of connected with, I
we
have to
do like
admit.
we do like a walk-in wardrobe, don't we?
We do. We do. So, Phoebes, I open every episode of the podcast with the following two questions. However, I'm guessing that these two questions are going to truly peel away the layers to reveal your narrative, perhaps more so than some others. Where did you grow up?
Well, I actually grew up in Balmoral. I was
Yeah.
adopted when I was 10 days old from Vietnam. It was 1974. My parents went over to Vietnam and adopted me, which I didn't realize at the time was just fraught with so much danger because it was right in the middle of the war.
Oh,
And
wow. I've got goosebumps right now just going up my arms listening to that.
yeah, I didn't find that out until a lot longer. And I was watching a documentary on Vietnam, which I'd, watched later in life. And I think it was around December 1974, they were talking about how, when they were thinking about doing that baby lift operation where they air flighted babies out of Saigon at the time, because it was just so fraught with danger because they were coming down invading and it just wasn't safe. And I was adopted out in October 1974. So I was adopted at a time just before the Operation Babylift, which was incredible because if you actually look at the footage of Operation Babylift, there's a cargo plane full of babies,
Oh,
and they're
heavens.
all laid across the seats. It's another world. So I really recommend anyone Google that and see the footage. And
Mm.
tragically, the first plane load, they actually crashed and 2,000 babies perished. So it was very heartbreaking. I was,
That is extraordinary. Is that that's all documented, yeah? That you say
yes,
there's
yeah,
footage.
yeah.
Wow.
It's amazing. If you actually look in Google Images and you type in Operation Baby Lift and you just see all these soldiers holding babies and on the plane, they're in, little bassinets and it's just like, it's, sort of safety in numbers. And it's amazing. Like these are just tiny little infants that will fly into America and Australia and all around the world to safety, obviously without their parents. And my parents actually went and got me from an orphanage. And my mother said at the time, my adopted mother said to me that she went to about 5 different orphanages and she just wasn't feeling it. And she said it's a terrible feeling when you're over in a country that's full of war and tragedy, and you're seeing, these
Be hard
babies.
to feel anything other than fear, I would
Yeah,
imagine. Mm.
absolutely. And you want to take everybody home. And she just wasn't sort of connecting. I think, there's sort of a bit of a disconnect. And then she said that she came across me and I was lying in this butter box at the time and she just sort of felt it. She just felt it. So she went through the whole process of trying to get me out, and they said to her, look, I'm sorry, but it's going to take a month. And she said, well, we can't stay in this country. It's not safe. Like they were, literally bombing all around the city. And it wasn't safe to leave, but it wasn't safe to stay either. So
Mm.
she was a nurse at the time, so she had a bottle of painkillers, and also a bottle of whiskey, and she said to the officials,
Which was she taking?
she said to them, will this help get the papers through? And apparently they got stamped and they were able to leave that night. So it was, she was quite resourceful at the time.
Subtle coercion. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you did what you had to do. And funnily enough, I arrived back in Australia and I found out that I was allergic to rice, which is kind of bizarre. And so it
Thank
was
God
like
you were
all
airlifted out. You
went.
could have been in for a world of pain, literally.
Absolutely. And I'm pleased to say I'm no longer allergic to rice. But a lot of people have asked me, have you wanted to go back? And I've been sort of very realist about the whole emotional turmoil about going back. I've seen a lot of people want to go back to Vietnam and find their parents, and I totally sympathise and understand that. But I've also realised that I came from a country that was just babies were just being, flown out, and there's
Mm.
desperate parents wanting to find their children. So it kind of opens up this can of worms. And, I've heard stories of people going back and all these women come forward saying that you're my baby. And I just think that, I mean, these days you can have DNA tests, but I'm really happy with and really grateful for my life. So I
Isn't
don't
that
have that
fantastic?
personal need to do that. And I
Mm.
don't take it away from anyone that does do that. But I think that what that has done for me is it's brought a lot of peace in my life when you feel genuinely happy with yourself and you have a realistic
What a
version
wonderful thing to say.
of
Yeah.
I look back on, I mean, my life hasn't been perfect, but I'm always extremely grateful for everything that happens in my life, because I think that if you look at everything that happens as an experience and you learn the lesson from it, no
Mm.
bad things, you take away and you come across a much better person because of that.
Yeah, what a wonderful story. Thanks, Phoebes, because I know that's deeply, deeply personal. So thank you.
That's okay.
So in the lens of that and the wonderful and background that you do feel so grateful for, what's been the most powerful learning you've taken away from your childhood?
Probably independence. I think also being an only child, coming from a different country. Australia is obviously very multicultural now. I walk down the street and we've got an area called Zetland not far from us, and it's full of Asians, and you know, you we were a real melting pot. But when I was growing up, we weren't really like that. We were very Australian. There was people like Paul Hogan. It was very sort of mainstream Meadow League kind of. And also, my mother took me overseas, and we traveled a lot as a child. So I had a very unconventional childhood. I spent months overseas away from school. And I was very privileged to experience that. But then she brought me back and decided to move to a country town, which was just so far away from what I'd experienced around the world, where these people had never left this, town of 2,000 people and
And
had
where
never
was
seen
that,
another
Phoebes?
person.
Where did you move to?
We moved up to an area called Birrell Creek, which is up near Byron Bay. It's about, an hour and a half. And obviously, areas like that have evolved so much over the years because of
Mm.
tourism.
But they
But
were white Anglo-Saxon
oh,
potentially
totally
then.
white
Yeah.
Anglo-Saxon. It was a
Yeah.
completely different world.
Yeah.
And, people would just constantly ask me questions, and you just, I think being different growing up is, I think Carly Kwong actually talked about this, and being different as a child is a very emotional experience. And it's a
Mm.
very, you know, only as an adult that you realize that being different is a wonderful thing, but children
Yeah,
don't.
you don't celebrate it as a child, but as an adult, it's really you do come into your own and celebrate your difference.
Absolutely. And, there was a lot of racism growing up. And I think that I had to also, I didn't have any brothers or sisters that sort of grew up protecting me. So I was sort of thrown from this city world and, being traveling around the world to this tiny little country town, and having to
Mm.
adjust to that was a huge adjustment. And, at the time, my mother wasn't coping very well because it was a very primitive area we lived in. And she bought this house where there was no electricity and no running water. And I'm like, oh my God, it was like
That's
completely out
one
of
hell of an
my.
adventure. Yeah.
So yeah, it was an adventure. So and I think that, we
So
talk
what did
about,
you learn from that? Because that's a whole lot of things. That's a different style of lifestyle that's standing out from the crowd. What was the deepest recall that you have in terms of who you've become today when you look back at that time?
I think I just, and I know that this word is used so much, but I think it really was resilience. I
I
think
knew you were
that,
going to go there. But it's used so much, but I'm thinking it's something the generations coming through are losing. So, that's
yeah.
something I could get stuck on for hours.
Yeah, well, I agree with you on that. I don't think that this new generation is very resilient at all. When the going gets tough, they all seem to quit.
Mm,
But I grew up in a time where you didn't quit. I couldn't run away from any of this. And I had to face, this constant racism. And in fact, I remember we went to Bali at the time, and we had people following us around like we were celebrities. I kid you not.
wow.
My parents and I were going to restaurants. We had 5 people following us around because they couldn't understand why these 2 white people had an Asian child. And I remember my father got really angry one time and said, you need to leave my daughter alone. This is really invasive. They used to follow us into restaurants. It was like what celebrities would experience with the paparazzi. It was just so weird. So
Isn't that
it was
strange?
really
Mm.
quite and very invasive too. Like, no qualms to this curiosity, no sort of, oh, I probably shouldn't ask that question. Back then, people just blurted out things and just asked things blatantly without any sort of regard for, any diplomacy or perhaps
So
sense.
how old were you when, if you look at that now, how old were you? At what point did you embrace your perceived difference? Because it's not really difference if we look through today's lens. But at what age did you embrace that difference?
I don't think I really embraced it until I was an adult. I think that
Mm,
I had what what happens when you grow up with a lot of racism, that there tends to be a bit of shame about it. It's really quite strange, but it makes you feel like that there's something wrong with you when you have to put on this brave front to just combat and just to sort of put this, deadpan expression and just deal with it. And I think that it's not until now that I look back and think, wow, that was pretty full on. Like, I'm not sure that these days a lot of kids would be able to deal with what I had to deal with back then. I
mm,
think that
mm.
we live in a completely woke society to a certain extent where we're not allowed to say anything. And back then we
Well,
said
our cultural,
everything.
our multicultural exposure is certainly diversified a long
Absolutely.
way, but that's not to say that there isn't still, people aren't still subjected or feel
Oh,
that subjected to
absolutely.
racism even today.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
But I think I do think that it wasn't until I became an adult that I felt more comfortable. I think that there was a lot going on in my childhood at the time that I had to deal with, and that I didn't really kind of, one thing that being an only child does is it sort of creates this thing where it makes you very self-reliant. You don't
Mm,
have a
can
brother
understand that.
in you, and
Mm,
you just have to think, you're always thinking realistically. There's no comfort zone. I didn't have parents that gave me money when I left home. I left home at 16. Everything that I've done has been completely self-made. So there's just this constant, I have to keep going mentality, and I'm a real doer. So, and I think that that's why I find it really difficult to go on holidays.
mm. So how you were described to me as somebody I had to interview, Phoebes, I can see where it comes from, and I can see all of that in the character shining through. So there's no disappointment thus far. So could we start with perhaps your philanthropic commitment first? And clearly you've already touched on your background as an adopted child from Vietnam. Adopt Change, no doubt, is deeply personal. Can you tell us about the organization, your involvement, and what that means to you?
Well, it was founded by Deborah Lee Finesse, who obviously really struggled to adopt children. The adoption system is very broken. It's so difficult to adopt children in this country, to the point where it's just ridiculous. And the out of care home system is a very broken system. We've got children that are just being moved to house, and we've got over 45,000 children at the moment that are in out of home care, which is basically like a football stadium, when you put
Mm,
that into perspective. So the pandemic has been very difficult, obviously, to you know, build awareness on that to a certain extent, because, with lockdowns and things like that. But there is a big issue with this disconnect between children having this permanency. And, it's all about ensuring that children thrive, and that are in stable, loving homes. And even if that's not necessarily adoption, there has to be a better system that just enables this stability where, a child can be in a family and can be loved and thrived. And Deborah Lee Finesse said something really interesting. She said that she went to one of the orphanages, and she saw children that had been in orphanages since they were 3 years old, and they
mm.
just weren't thriving. Like, literally,
Oh,
because
no
they
wonder.
having that love and that human contact, they were just almost completely blank, and they're just, she said, just what that does to a child is just absolutely debilitating. So
Mm.
I'm one of their ambassadors for Adopt Change, and just some of the stories, I feel incredibly grateful for my story, and I feel like in comparison to what some of the other ambassadors and some of the stories that have happened is just really heartbreaking.
Wow.
Um, but I think
How
what I love
long's the
about,
organization been going, Phoebes? When did Deborah Lee start it?
oh God, I'm not actually sure, but I mean, her children are quite, they're obviously
Big.
adult children,
Mm.
they're in their 20s now. So it's been going for, over 20 years, I'd say. And she's been a
Mm.
fierce advocate, for permanency of children.
Yeah.
And, and I love her for that. She's an amazing woman, and she's just so dynamic. And what you see is what you get with Deb. She's just
Yeah.
fabulous.
Yeah.
And she's a lot of fun. So, we, Angela Bishop, who's also a media ambassador for Adopt Change, and I were down at in Melbourne at one of their events, and Deborah was there, and she's just so inspirational, and it's just so authentic where she's coming from. And it's quite infectious. And I think what I love about this organization is that it becomes like a family when people have come from backgrounds where there's either suffering or, there's hardships. You form this family, and it's
Mm.
just, it's a really beautiful thing. It makes you really united as a front for these not-for-profits. And I think as I get older, you become softer, and you want to give back more. So yeah, I think, you know, people are just, nobody wants a child to be suffering.
No.
And,
No.
everybody wants the best for children. So
Yeah. And you're in a
yeah.
position now to pay back and on that gratitude level, which is fantastic. So well done. Brilliant. Personal experience is, and as you touched on, I mean, it's a powerful catalyst for involvement, and it's not the only not-for-profit that you've been involved in. Shake It Up Australia Foundation. What motivated you to get involved with that as a charitable pursuit?
Well, at the time, which was about 10 years ago, my business partner, who was my husband at the time, had developed Parkinson's. We were overseas, and he passed out a couple of times. And when he was passing out, he was shaking. And I didn't really sort of think about it at the time. And then I realized when he came back, he was sitting there watching TV, and I noticed this tremor that happened. And I was like, what's going on? And he said, it's just started happening. I said, well, how long has this been happening for? And he said, oh, about a month. So I said, you have to go and get that checked out. And he went to the doctor, and they instantly diagnosed him with Parkinson's. So one of the tests with Parkinson's, they make you walk up and down. And one of the things is you'll notice that quite often people with Parkinson's, they can't swing their arm. So it's like the brain and the body doesn't quite connect. And that is one of the symptoms. It's a very tricky disease because it affects everybody very differently. It's not like a cancer where there are components of the disease that that have regulations that you've got one drug that assists with it. Parkinson's can come across physically, cognitively. It can cause depression, tremors, and and then you can get dyskinesia. And it's a very fine. It's obviously a neurodegenerative disease, so within time it does
Mm.
get worse. And I think one of the biggest problems with Parkinson's is that, and particularly I guess for a lot of men, is when they get it, they find it very emasculating. They just curl up into a ball thinking they don't want to do anything. So one of the reasons why I became an ambassador, which they invited me to become an ambassador, was that I remember my mother said to me, oh, Rob doesn't want to go to the football, which he loves. Being a Hawthorn supporter,
He's
absolutely loves.
withdrawing.
Like, yeah,
Mm.
he's from Adelaide, but for some reason he goes for Hawthorn. And it's like his passion. That's like his best friend. And when he said to my mother, as sad as it is, um, when he said to my mother that he didn't want to go to the games because nail biting games brought out his tremor, I found that really heartbreaking because I thought, how
Mm.
can you please take away something that you love more than anything because you're wanting to shy away because of the symptoms of this. So
And that
I
was the catalyst to becoming involved.
yeah, so I became an ambassador just to take that shame out of, and I'm really kind of happy with the results of the ambassadorship because I've had so many people that have come forward that have newly been diagnosed with Parkinson's that I know wouldn't have had this open conversation. And so
Mm.
they've come forward and said, look, a friend of mine has just been diagnosed. Can I get them to contact you? Somebody I know, I've just been diagnosed. They can talk to us, they can have this conversation, that they can get tips on how to manage it. And just that feeling of knowing that it isn't a death sentence. Yes, it will get worse, but there are so many things that you can do to combat it before it gets really bad. Gives them hope. And I think that previously there was a lot of misconceptions about Parkinson's. I think that, it was always described as an old person's disease and,
Mm.
that was it. You could go out
Mm.
to pasture and it's just not
Mm.
the case whatsoever.
So
So,
you've really got involved in two highly emotive not for profits. How much does giving back to the two charities take out of you emotionally?
look, mostly, I mean, Shake It Up is a different one because I think that we live with that on a regular basis. My partner's just had to step down from the company because of his Parkinson's. And it is an
Sorry to hear
emotional
that.
roller coaster.
Mm.
And what I'm really upset about with that is that there isn't, the aged care system in Australia is just shocking in terms
Mm.
of, we talk about older Australians working, and there is so many great older Australians that, basically the majority of people will be working till the day that they die. The days of retiring with the cost of living and everything are gone. Everyone
Yeah,
will be
agree with
working.
that.
The thing is that people love working. I honestly
Mm.
believe that when people stop working is usually when they die. You
Yeah,
need
I
something
couldn't
that
agree
keeps
more.
going.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
So there's this means testing that just infuriates me, that just because you have a business, they assume that, there's these mass assumptions, and it's just so untrue. Obviously, what the fashion industry is like. You can have a great
Mm.
season one season and the
Yeah.
next season absolutely
Exactly. And
horrible.
it's all about inventory, and that can bring you undone at any point in the journey. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's so
Mm.
subject to so many things. And, because of these requirements that he's had to step down from our business, which he founded, which we were really
That's
quite upset
heartbreaking.
about that a couple of
Mm.
weeks ago. I felt it was really unfair. And I still do. But, I've also maintained that, he may not be recognised on paper, but, he's still an integral part of decision making and stuff. But yeah, I mean, getting back to what you were saying, it does bring up a lot of emotion because when there is a personal element to
Of
not-for-profits, it
course.
does become personal.
Mm.
But I think that it's a good emotion in some ways because when you listen to other people's stories, it's so inspiring.
Mm.
I think
Mm.
that what that does, being an ambassador, is it brings an authenticity. It's not just a celebrity ambassador or a media ambassador
No, it's
necessarily.
got a lot more meaning. I understand that, having had personal involvements in not-for-profit for personal motivation before, and it's a different level of connection than just being seconded in. Mm.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it also makes you very passionate about certain causes. So
Mm.
I look at those not-for-profits as almost like, like another job in a sense. Not necessarily work, but just something that I love.
Yeah,
It just feels great to be involved with it.
right. Well, Phoebe, coming up, we're going to discuss what's going on in the fashion industry.
Oh dear.
We'll be back shortly. So, Phoebes, you co-founded the strategic fashion and lifestyle brand Garland and Garland in 2002 with your business partner Robert,
Yeah.
who you've mentioned. The fashion industry, like many others, is facing into so many opportunities and challenges. And if we look through the lens of both those opportunities and challenges at the same time, could we just have a look at a couple of points that the industry is staring down the barrel of at the moment? Could we start with sustainability?
Mm. Well, look, I think it's a conversation that every fashion brand has to address. Sustainability, was perhaps seen initially as a buzzword, and it definitely isn't. There, every fashion brand, accessory brand, everybody has to have this discussion because this waste that the fashion industry has, particularly in fast fashion, has just been
Mm,
deplorable. We're the biggest single users of plastics, and it's pretty
mm,
bad. But at the same time, the thing about sustainability is that I have seen extreme senses of sustainability where, you've got garments that break down and stuff like that, which is great. But the hardest thing about sustainability in the fashion industry is finding that commercial balance
yeah,
because
there must be a conflict between perceived value and sustainability.
absolutely. And I think
Mm,
that particularly now, one of the biggest challenges with sustainability is affordability with the cost of living. So, it may cost you suddenly 700 and, $85 to produce a beautiful dress, but the
mm,
question, can people afford it, and how many of those dresses are you going to sell at that price point?
yeah.
So there's enormous challenges with sustainability. And I think that to find that happy balance with sustainability, you have to have a component of your story that's sustainable. And, obviously, the certifications for fabrics and ethical manufacturing really definitely helps.
Mm.
Um, but I also think that it's not just going to be the reason, and to be brutally honest, it's not going to be the reason why consumers will purchase a garment based just on
You don't
sustain.
think with the generations coming through that it might not be the trigger point to purchase, or do you think
No,
cost keeps pushing
I,
out front
I
as
think
the
at the moment, the
motivation?
cost of living is a real issue for this
Mm,
country. I really do. And I think that if somebody, I mean, you've really got to ask yourself, how many times do you buy an $800 garment?
mm,
Over a certain price point, it does become really difficult. And I've had some, we represent enormous array of brands, and I've had beautiful Danish brands that have had all the sustainability certifications and ethical manufacturing and stuff, and they've done really well, and they're great. But I've also had other brands that it just reaches the point where the boutiques say to me, look, our customer just won't pay that amount.
mm.
I mean, it's sort of like everybody does want the sustainability, but the question is, if it does affect people's bottom line, they're not going to buy it. So we need to have somehow, and I don't know how you actually make this happen, but there needs to be sustainability within, a certain price point, or some, more open regulations where it does become more affordable for people to
Mm.
produce sustainable garments, because at the moment it's very expensive to
So
do
what does
true.
this mean for fast fashion? Do you think fast fashion is sustainable? Is it going to endure at the same levels as it has with global and domestic brands that have, really been such significant powerhouses in the rag trade and the fashion industry?
Look, I think a lot of fashion brands out there have really suffered, and they haven't been an exception to the rule. You've seen Zara suddenly close down a lot of stores.
Mm,
H&M, they've all had to reevaluate what they've done as well, because they haven't been able to ignore the sustainability, and that whole fast fashion thing had its time, and now
mm.
that's turned on its head. So suddenly they're
So I'm
looking at.
still hearing Primark is firing and as a brand because the UK cost of pressure is so significant that people are still resorting to, and the same with with Kmart
Yeah.
here in Australia.
Mm.
Be it in home and fashion, they're still resorting to price as a motivator. and all of this climate change input into more sustainability is getting pushed further and further to the back.
Well, I mean, it was interesting. I was watching this old video clip about Ralph Lauren, and he was wearing this, plaid shirt, and there was some great photos of him with his family with this plaid shirt, and they said to him, "Where did you get that shirt?" And he said, "I got it from Kmart." And they said, "Oh, really?" Barbara Walters said, "I thought you designed it." And he said, "No." And she said, "Well, why are you wearing it in this interview?" He said, "I wanted to look great." And
I wanted to look great, so I wore Kmart, not my own brand. Go
yeah,
figure.
so it was really funny. But so the thing is about some of those companies now is that even they're having the conversation. So if you go into Kmart, you'll see that they're using BCI cotton, so they are using
Yes.
accredited cotton.
Mm.
My only question with these chain stores is based on volume, which obviously they've got the buying power to get the lower prices, which is another factor that we have to consider.
Mm.
But in terms of ethical manufacturing. So I think, Fashion Evolution's coming up again as their big anniversary of that whole Rana Plaza disaster where all those poor people in Bangladesh were locked in and
Died, yeah.
died. That was dreadful. And I think that is, in terms of these big chain stores, they have to be held accountable for that ethical component. I think that when you go into Zara and you go into these other big chain stores, you'll notice, like I went into Zara and they had this Italian fabric on, particularly for winter. Summer it gets a bit cheap.
Mm.
But they are having the sustainable story because I think now they've been under the pump so much and it's turned on their heads that they've had to come up and comply with sustainable standards. Now, it is a bit controversial. There is that sort of whole conversation of, is this greenwashing? And yes,
Mm.
perhaps in some cases it can be. It can be a bit of an oxymoron to have a $14 garment at retail from H&M saying that it's
Stay
sustainable. No
sustainable.
one's going to
Mm.
believe that.
Mm. Yeah, the
And
providence of that might prove otherwise, but
that's really questionable. And I'm really pleased that, we have pulled back from that fast fashion. And, there's now, buying vintage and, buying secondhand,
recycle
yeah,
and rent rather
recycle,
than purchase.
upcycle,
And yeah,
and it's great.
there's a lot going on.
I'm
Mm.
loving that. But the downside is that, with inflation, it has impacted retail. So it has really impacted the trade, and that is globally.
Mm.
And I think that the biggest challenge for the fashion industry is to find this happy balance between sustainable fashion, ethical fashion, and also bringing it out at an affordable price point that's commercial. And we
Yeah.
haven't bridged that gap. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, you're always going to have a component of mainstream Australia that just simply can't afford a garment over
I get
$200.
it. What
So,
about AI? If we look at some of the technology disruptions going on, I know you have your wholesalers to retailers, and I'm assuming you've got a showroom full of product. Are we going to find the day where sampling becomes less important and it's done as virtual showrooms, or do people still want to touch and feel and see the garments in person?
well, I think what I have found since COVID, I mean, I did showings in lockdown, which was really interesting. That was trying,
That was almost virtual.
weights of knitwear to somebody on screen can be really difficult and what it feels like.
Mm.
Um, Retailers now and buyers have become more au fait with buying virtually. But I
Yep.
don't think that if it's a new brand, particularly and over a certain price point, there is that component that has to see and touch and feel that garment.
Mm.
And, there is a lot of virtual runways and virtual showrooms like Jaw and, um, and things like that. But it still requires that retailer to go on and use it. So she's not going to go on necessarily on her own accord. There still has to be that middleman that says, look, we're presenting ranges. We'd love you to come in and see it. I still probably do about, and it has increased, I probably do about 30% of our sales through lookbooks and virtual.
No, there you go. Mm.
And it is becoming more. But that is based on existing customers, usually that have seen and know the brand and know the fit. If you don't, and it's a
And
more
also trust you.
yeah, and if it's a more expensive one, or a new brand, they definitely want to have a look because it's a risk,
Yeah.
and it's difficult at the moment. I would love to see AI really drive retail sales for
Yeah.
retailers.
There you go. Well, Phoebe, changing tack completely now. And sorry, I called you Phoebe. Phoebes. I know that's a parental name,
No,
Phoebe,
that's
so
okay.
you're not in trouble. So you're clearly passionate about the fashion industry, which I am too. And I actually studied fashion design in the early 80s and have been intersecting with that industry for the last 40 odd years. And personally, my wardrobe choices absolutely state who I am. Once upon a time, it was very, very corporate in high heels, and now it's very much about leggings and combat boots is my look today. But what do your fashion choices say about you, Phoebes?
Well, it's funny. I mean, I'm a real black girl. I'd say that 70% of my wardrobe is
Go.
black.
Yep, that
And
same.
I do like prints, but I'm very fussy about prints. I like a certain print, but I also find that particularly now that prints, well, for me, and that whole quiet luxury thing has really kind of,
Mm,
I think with the economic climate, people want better and they want to
mm,
have staple wardrobe pieces from
yeah.
brands like i.e. Scanlan Theodore, where every piece of Scanlan Theodore I still have that I've bought because it's
Mm.
timeless and it doesn't date. And they do this
But
fantastic.
that's what you like. I want to know what your fashion choices actually say about you. What's the expression about you that comes through with what you put on every day?
Probably very minimalist, and sleek, and polished. That's
Yeah.
probably my look. I don't do casual very well. In fact, I've had boyfriends that go, "Oh," and my daughter said to me, "Why don't you just rock up in jeans and a t-shirt like other mums at school?" And I'm like, well, that's not really me. I had somebody else that said, "Why aren't you lounging around in the sarong by the pool?" I'm like, no, that's not me.
Yeah, I get that. I
I,
get
I, I
that.
sort of have this mentality that, and I guess that's why I would love wearing black, is that if
Mm.
you wear it from morning to night, then you can go from desk to dinner easily. And
Yep.
it's easy. Whereas if you wear a pair of jeans,
You're speaking to the converted Phoebes. It's not a hard sell in my world.
no, well, yeah, it's the staple color of Melbourne too, isn't
It
it?
certainly is. Yeah, it certainly is. Yeah. Yeah, without question. So there are a number of 50 plus year old female style icons now, and that shift is growing year on year. Yet
Mm.
so many women struggle as they age and start to feel invisible and unseen. What does it mean today, or what do you feel it means today to dress your age?
Well, I think these days, and what we've found in the agency as well, is that it's all about ageless dressing. So the one category that works really well in fashion, and particularly in Australia, is lifestyle fashion. Because suddenly you've
Mm,
got garments that 30-year-olds would wear, but also that can be transferred to a 65, 70-year-old. So, things like knitwear and leggings, like you said, and just, she's a lot younger than she was. The women
yeah.
more fashionable. They love color. They love prints. And
They love all the things you're saying you don't like, Phoebes.
well, that's why it's always really difficult when they say to me, which part of the range would you buy if you're a buyer? And I'm like, no, I'm really not your customer.
Yeah.
But they love it, and I have to ensure that we have that component. But I think that suddenly you're seeing, you'll see a 65-year-old woman wearing a blazer, and then that 30-year-old woman would be wearing the same blazer. So, that difference between we don't no longer have that old lady component.
No,
It's
God,
not.
don't say that. I'm 60 and I can't think of myself
I don't think you
in
look
old
60
lady
at all.
clothes.
I think you're lying. I don't think you're 60 at all.
I wish I was lying, but I'm not. But I am also wearing
Amazing.
combat boots and stretchy faux leather leggings whilst I'm talking to you. So I'm not
Very
quite your
cool.
traditional.
No, you're way cool.
What about using the power, how we use the power of clothing to make our presence felt?
Look, I think it's about owning, feeling really comfortable in your skin and about having that individual sort of component where you know what looks good on you and you're really confident in what you wear. That comes with, experience, and to
Mm,
a certain extent, a love of fashion.
mm,
We all have things that we look back on and go, God almighty, why was I wearing that?
I
I don't
know.
think there's anybody in the world
But
that has.
I've also had days where, and not sure that I really should admit this, but I have absolutely had days where I started out in something, and if I could, I've gone home and changed because it didn't define who I felt I wanted to be
Yeah,
on that particular day, and it just wasn't working. Do you have
yeah.
those days?
Oh, yes, they usually end up on the floor. Somewhere. I look over and there's a pile of garments on the floor, and I'm like, oh, well, it's clearly none of those worked. I think
Oh, and
everything
those mornings
takes
where you
okay.
put on 10 different looks and it's
Oh,
not, and it's just not working. And yet,
yeah.
last week the same thing looked great. This week it just doesn't work.
No, I think also you've got to have that. I find that what does work is you kind of visualize outfits. So it's sort of
Yeah.
like in that movie Clueless, where she had the mix and
That
match thing.
was the movie,
Yes,
Clueless.
Clueless.
Yes.
Yes. Um, if you can visualize sort of, it does help, I find, if you can visualize certain
Yeah,
outcomes and what works.
I
But then
agree.
sometimes that doesn't even work either, because I have done that.
Yeah.
And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, no,
I
that's
do that, but I know as I'm getting ready in the morning in the bathroom, I am thinking through how the outfit's coming together. But as I say, some days that just doesn't quite work out. And some days I'm overly ambitious. I think I'm going to do something really adventurous and I really bugger it up. So, sometimes
But
it
then
just
there's
doesn't.
also these days where you think you have a great outfit and you think, oh, I wasted that outfit. I didn't get to see. I really
You
need to
could
sort of mentally save that outfit for a better time when
Oh,
occasion's been full.
I could talk shop and clothing with you all day, Phoebes, but I know we haven't got the luxury of doing that. Could I ask you, as one of the power of women questions I ask nearly every guest, and I'd love to know in terms of you, what is a phrase that defines you?
Well, a friend of mine described me as an optimistic realist, and I think, that's
Please
probably,
explain.
yeah, I think that that's probably true. No matter how bad things get, I really like to find a way through things, and but I'm also a realist. I look at things and I think, well, how are we going to get there? And I'm very solution orientated and a real doer. So I think that he probably nailed that when he described me.
I like that. I like that. You can wear that with a badge of honor. Well, Phoebes, it has been my great pleasure to have you join Power of Women podcast today, and thank you so much. So, for anybody watching this podcast, please be sure to follow and subscribe, and you can also keep track of what we're up to on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. If there is a guest that you think would be great for the Power of Women podcast, um, connect with me via my website on the contact page, which is powerofwomen.com.au, and let me know the name and perhaps the topic that you'd like me to pursue. But thanks for joining us. Until next time.